What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again from metaltrenches.com. As always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoy it, share it, comment, all that good stuff, and check in the description is a link to our Patreon so that you can become a supporter. $1 a month makes a huge difference covering my overhead costs and allowing me to expand what I'm doing here. But for now, back by popular demand, we're going to do another ranking list, and this was a specific request. Somebody who really enjoyed the Enslaved list asked if I would do kind of any of the other second wave black metal bands, and ultimately I decided Immortal seemed to be the most appropriate given just my familiarity with them and the number of albums that they have to work with here. So let's just dive into that, and we're going to start with 1992's Diabolical Fullmoon Mysticism. This is their obviously first album, and predictably it's a bit rough around the edges. It's still quite enjoyable. Like they don't start off on a really bad foot. I'd say it's not as strong as some of the other debuts from the other second wave black metal bands around this time, but it's a decent effort. I'd give it about a C. Pretty average stuff. It's not bad. It's not great. It's probably their least, well, one of their least memorable albums, and not one that you're going to spend a lot of time listening to, but it has its merits. So C feels about right. Then from there, we're going to go to just a year later, 1993, with Pure Holocaust. This is an absolute classic. This is kind of the album that people talk about and remember when they're discussing the early days of Immortal. This is pretty much the album that put them on the map. Obviously, sounds pretty typical of, if you know what second wave black metal sounds like, you know what this album sounds like. I always felt like Immortal had kind of the thrashiest sound out of all of the early second wave bands, and so they stand out a little bit on that regard. It's interesting to kind of listen to all the little like subtle differences between these very raw, abrasive sounding albums. But despite how just rough and raw and ugly it is, it really did amaze me like how this was one of the albums that sort of got me into this genre finally, and I was a little bit late coming to it, but it just like struck me, and it's pretty impressive from a technical standpoint in terms of production and musicianship and everything. There's obviously some problems there, but I feel like just because it was one of the first of its time and it's a pretty important album, I feel pretty good about giving it an A. Like, I feel like it deserves some extra points in that innovation zone. And so I think that feels about right to me. 1995, we got Battles in the North, which was another big classic album for the genre and for the band. I was crack up looking at this cover. It's like one of the worst, definitely not the worst, but one of the worst early black metal covers, but just classic. The band members on the cover in their corpse paint, but something about like that corny white background and there just being two of them, and it's so it's super cringy. But the album isn't. It's a good album. Obviously also has some production issues. Some of the tracks are like literally cut off, which adds a certain layer of charm to it. But yeah, it's got issues. Part of me still wants to put it relatively high, just given its stature and those classic riffs, a lot of classic songs on this album. But I feel like it's not quite as important as Pure Holocaust. It's just sort of rolling off the same ideas, so I think it deserves to sort of lose a point in that regard. So I feel pretty good putting it at like a B. And then trudging forth, we've got my personal least favorite album from the band, 1997's Blizzard Beasts. This seems to be a popular point of discussion among fans, that this is kind of their worst album. I know some people who are kind of Blizzard Beasts apologists, but it's very forgettable. Not a lot of like classic songs on here, not songs that you're going to necessarily hear them playing live or that people are going to request from them. And it's the only album in their discography I actually don't own a physical copy of, and the completionist in me wants to remedy that at some point, but I don't feel too bad about it. I even forget that it even exists half the time. I remember posting a picture of all my albums together, and somebody was like, "Where's Blizzard Beast?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's a thing." So yeah, this one I ultimately feel pretty good about putting at D. Um, yeah, it's the one album where I'm not gonna be grabbing for it. I'm not gonna be recommending it. Yeah, that enough said, I think. And then amusingly though, we go from what I consider to be their absolute worst album to easily their best. 1999's At the Heart of Winter has to be S tier. It's consistently regarded as the best album from the band from most fans. Obviously, there's some wiggle room in there, and my opinion is by no means the only opinion. But there's just so many merits of this album. I mean, even down to that gorgeous cover art. Like, this is definitely the best album art that they have. And then it's backed by amazing tunes, and there's so much growth on this album too, because not only is like the production better, it's got this much more spacious feel to it. They really nailed that, just like the cold feel that you get from looking at the cover matches how the album sounds. The kind of mythos behind the whole concept elements of the band and sort of LARPing style to it really come together. And the songwriting just makes a huge jump on this one. Like, much more progressive song structures, but still plenty of that fun, thrashy, intense riffing, very heavy and very consistent. Like, this is one of their just start to finish great albums where every song is good. And not only that, but they all seem to kind of flow into each other, and it forms a really cohesive message and just idea. And so for all those reasons, this is easily an S tier album for Immortal. And we got Damned in Black in 2000, and I feel like we took some steps away from those kind of progressive moves they made on that album. But this is still a really good one. Like, I feel like this is a kind of another album that sort of gets demoted in their discography, for a reason I'll mention in a minute. But it's still a really solid album. Great songs, great kind of more thrashy, just intense production is stepped up too, but it's not as powerful as At the Heart of Winter. It's not as memorable, but still just kind of a underrated album. I think B feels pretty good. But as I said, there are some reasons, and one of the main reasons is that it gets greatly overshadowed by 2002's Sons of the Northern Darkness, which is a very similar album. I consider these two to be kind of like sister albums. Just very similar approach, similar production. Even the album art is kind of similar. You just move from red to blue. And, you know, but yeah, this is the superior album. It's got better. Every idea that's kind of put on Damned in Black is just done better on Sons of the Northern Darkness. I consider putting this S tier, and I know some people would, but ultimately it just doesn't have the expansive and more innovative qualities of At the Heart of Winter. And so it's just hard for me to put those at the same level. It's definitely it's one of their best albums. It's definitely in my top 3 from them. And sometimes I'd say I listen to that album actually more than At the Heart of Winter, just because this is kind of a more fun album, whereas this is a more sort of artsy album, if that makes sense. But yeah, really great stuff. Lots of mainstay live songs on this one that you're going to hear them playing quite a bit. Great stuff. Yeah, great album. All Shall Fall is another album I feel that kind of unnecessarily gets crapped on a lot. Another one of their albums that I really like the cover art for. Very kind of cool, just pleasing to look at aesthetically concept, and it matches their overall concept and style. And it's a good album. Like, it's pretty consistent. I like all the songs. It's got All Shall Fall, which is a great song. This came out in 2009, by the way. I don't think I said that. It's good. It's good. Like, people act like it's this like bad album, but it's not. It's not up here, but I think B feels pretty fair. Like, I enjoy listening to it. I don't have any problems with it. I'd say it's above average, but it's just not amazing. But for like a modern black metal album, just sort of sticking to its roots and sticking to the blueprint, does a fine job. And then kind of in a similar vein, then we've got Northern Chaos Gods, which just came out in 2018. So obviously this is the first album to not have Abath on vocals. and we were all kind of waiting to see how that would pan out, if that would work. And I gotta say, they pretty much knocked it out of the park. I was pleasantly surprised. I had kind of low expectations, and they were exceeded. Like, I enjoyed it. I think the songs are really good. I think it's, again, kind of really doing a good job of mixing sort of more modern production and just mentality with still sticking to those raw, ugly, classic overtones that define second wave black metal. They never compromise on that. And so, pretty consistent, very enjoyable. It grew on me over time too. Like, with each listen, I was more and more impressed with it. Again, nothing to sort of write home about. No major like innovations. But that, I don't think that was their like what they set out to do. Like, these are just guys that want to make raw black metal and with a lot of thrashy riffs, and that's what they do. They're not setting out to rewrite it, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think it deserves a B, and that is it, really. Like, I think I feel pretty good about this. You also notice from this that, like, they make a lot of great albums. Like, there's not a lot of really average or below average material here, aside from those those two at the bottom. I would recommend any one of these albums, but particularly these top three are really my mainstays. Pure Holocaust, for its just classic value and classic sound. One of the most important black metal albums to sort of start what we came to know as the genre. And then their more progressive opus that's seen as sort of their seminal album with At the Heart of Winter. And then Sons of the Northern Darkness, just their like anthemic live songs that you can jam over and over again. But yeah, that pretty much covers it. Hope you enjoyed that. If you did, there's a link in the description as well where you can find this template so that you can make your own. Love to hear in the comments where you agree, where you disagree, what else you'd like to see in the future. And be sure to stick around and watch the other videos on this channel, because there's plenty more. So of course, again, please do subscribe, hit the like button if you enjoyed it, share it with others, and again, consider becoming a patron, because that really helps me out. But for now, Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.